For NYUp, Syracuse.com, this is Matt Parrino joined by Ryan Talbot, and we are on the eve, recording on Sunday night of Week 3 of Buffalo Bills OTAs, organized team activities in Orchard Park, and we are going to discuss some of what we've seen over the course of the last 2 weeks and what we're watching for heading in to the final week before minicamp, Ryan. And, I'm going to start with, one player that I think has flown under the radar this offseason that I'm really going to be keeping my eye on over the course of the next 2 weeks because it seems like he's really getting himself comfortable, and that's defensive end Trent Murphy. I think that that's a guy that, being overlooked a little bit because of the fact Jerry Hughes' big contract extension, Shaq Lawson, all of the news around the Bills not picking up his fifth-year option. I think Murphy's lack of production in his first year in Buffalo kind of has fans forgetting about the fact that he could be an impact player when it comes to rushing the quarterback. A lot of rumors in the offseason, the Bills potentially looking for a defensive end, maybe via trade. A Jadavian Clowney from Houston was mentioned at times. But I think that Trent Murphy, this is a big year for him. A guy that, put up 9 sacks a few years ago in Washington, at times has shown an ability to, generate some pass rush, get to the quarterback. And you talk about Jerry Hughes and the what he could gain from playing next to Ed Oliver and the, more opportunities that he could see. I think that's equal part for Trent Murphy.
Yeah, without a doubt. And fair or unfair, Trent Murphy was coming off of a very serious injury last year. And I don't think it was necessarily realistic to expect this guy to come in and get anywhere close to double-digit sacks or anything like that. But, fans look back on his first year and they said, boy, what a disappointing season based on what the Bills paid him. 3 years, $22.5 million, which I think took a lot of people by surprise when they signed him to that deal. But now, 2 years removed from this injury, he's saying that he's 100%. He's saying that he's not worried about the nagging injuries. You have Leslie Frazier saying, oh boy, he looks like a completely different player, and I've told him that. Those are little bright spots to look forward to. And even after extending Jerry Hughes, I went into, looking at a position-by-position look. I said, boy, defensive end is still a pretty big need for the Bills going forward because of Shaq Lawson's uncertainty, because of what we've seen out of Murphy so far. But if Murphy can come alive, and again, it doesn't have to be 10-plus sacks. If he can get 7, 8, 9 sacks as a secondary defensive end, behind Jerry Hughes, obviously, on the other side. But if Hughes has more sacks, if you have the inside pass rush from Ed Oliver, well, then all of a sudden 7, 8, 9 sacks isn't that bad when you're going to be getting some from Oliver when Hughes could be leading the way. So I do think that this year he's a guy to keep an eye on.
A lot of guys watching practice on the sidelines. I mean, that's been one of the big storylines of the first 2 weeks of practice here with, big marquee free agent signings like, center Mitch Morris, wide receiver Cole Beasley, running backs TJ Yeldon and Frank Gore on the sideline watching practice. And it's a little bit disappointing because, you want that chemistry to start being built if you're a fan and somebody that wants to see things, get going. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of painting a big picture of all of the injuries, taking one particular injury / position where you feel like that's the most concerning because you'd like to see that, kind of chemistry start to build there.
Oh, I would have to go with Mitch Morse then, just because the center-quarterback relationship is so important in this league. And mind you, I think he'll be good to go for training camp, and I think they're going to still have plenty of time to mesh with one another. But yeah, I mean, in today's NFL, it's really important that you're on the same page with your quarterback. And Morse, the Bills paid him big money in free agency. They expect big things out of him. They expect him to be able to call out what he sees to make life easier for Josh Allen. That's another thing that they're going to have to get on the same page with. So based on the injuries that we've seen so far, I think that Mitch Morse is the most significant in terms of his importance to the team and his importance to Josh Allen.
Yeah, I think that, for me, it's been the running back situation just because of the interesting dynamic of who the Bills brought in through free agency and the fact that they drafted Devin Singletary. I mean, you talk about Frank Gore coming into an already experienced backfield with LaShawn McCoy at the helm, and then you add a veteran guy like TJ Yeldon, who's going into his fifth season, and a guy that's had some success in the run and pass game in this league, and it all of a sudden becomes a very crowded backfield. And with Yeldon and Frank Gore out, two guys that I think at this point you wonder about the security of a roster spot for both of them, because of the fact that the Bills have shown that they're willing to bring four running backs to the 53-man roster into the regular season. But, one of those guys last year was Tywan Jones, who has a lot of, special teams upside. And you look at a guy like Sonoris Perry, obviously made some big news for the O.J. Simpson stuff. But, you made a great point in your article that went up on nyup.com over the weekend. One guy at every position that could, stir things up on the roster. And you were hit the nail on the head with Perry. He is one of, the elite special teams performers at his position. And it really makes you question, all right, if Yeldon's not in there, is he picking things up? They signed him to a 2-year deal, but I think only part of the first is guaranteed. And in Frank Gore, you have a guy that looked good at times last year in Miami, but is going to be 36 years old. So I think that as we progress through training camp this year, that every every team drill, every preseason game, those are going to be the guys that you really take a look at to try to figure out who's going to kind of cross the finish line as we get to the 53-man roster.
Yeah, and this is a big opportunity for Perry. You already mentioned his special teams ability. He had 9 special teams tackles last year. That was good for 6th in the league. If he can show some ability out of the backfield, some ability to catch the ball as a number 3, number 4 running back in this system, he could bump a guy like Yeldon out. I think that Gore, barring a more serious injury, is safe just because they love the leadership that he brings to the locker room, that toughness that he brings. I think that he's going to be a calming presence even for a guy like LaShawn McCoy, and he's a perfect type of mentor for a Devin Singletary. But anything can happen. But that said, Yeldon's job is far from safe, so a huge opportunity for Sonoris Perry.
Mm-hmm. Guys, we're going to bring you one last little segment here for this week's OTAs podcast, but we want to remind you, definitely head over to Facebook, give us a follow on there, Instagram as well, and obviously we're all over the place on Twitter. We'll have content, all different types of content for you guys throughout the rest of the offseason, and definitely ramped up a ton as we get into training camp and the regular season. For that information, I'll definitely put a comment on this video. But one thing that came out last week that really caught my eye was a Q&A that Tim Graham did with new quarterbacks coach Ken Dorsey. It's the first interview that he's done since he became the Bills quarterbacks coach, in a very important role, even more so after the retirement of Derek Anderson. And there's a few things that I picked out of there that I thought were very interesting. Obviously, one of the first things is he knows right off the bat that he wants to bring a calming approach to the situation. And if you look on the sideline or on the field, on the practice field, Ken Dorsey is just that. At some points, you kind of sit there and look at him, and he's very dialed in, watching, taking it all in, and that could breed confidence in a Josh Allen, a guy that, Derek Anderson brought a lot of that stuff. I mean, you talk about the experience and the things that they've seen in this league at the highest levels of football, and Ken Dorsey's done that at the college and the professional level. And I think that his experience with Cam Newton, I mean, this seems like, for as much coverage as it's gotten, it still seems like it's been understated, the importance that Ken Dorsey could have for Josh Allen.
Yeah, I really like the fit of Dorsey here in Buffalo, coaching Josh Allen. You mentioned he worked with Cam Newton in Carolina, and Cam Newton had nothing but positive things to say about Dorsey, even up to this day. So they had a great working relationship. And I think it's great that Dorsey was a former quarterback himself, and he understands that you can't get too high, you can't get too low as a quarterback, and he's going to be there for Josh Allen. He's going to be able to say, okay, hey, maybe he's playing great at some time. He's going to remind Josh, listen, your confidence is. Don't let your confidence lead to overconfidence. Don't make a silly throw just because of how well you're throwing the ball. Or if he's down after throwing an interception, hey, it's all right. We're going to get the ball back. You'll have an opportunity to make up for that. So he's going to be that calming presence. He's that guy that's had experience. One of the best college quarterbacks of all time. Obviously, I didn't transition over to the pros, but someone that can really come in and I think and guide Josh Allen here in year 2.
It's funny you make a great point that it didn't transition into the pros, but I think sometimes that, the guys that, you go back to Michael Jordan, and the reason that he said he never got into coaching is because the guys that do it, or the gals that do it at the highest level, it's hard to then go and coach people that maybe can't do the things that you were able to do. And I think for guys in professional football players that, maybe don't reach the highest levels, they could share some of the things that went wrong. And I think that Ken Dorsey is a perfect example of that. Another thing from the interview that I took and really thought was interesting is, Tim asked Ken to describe what he thinks about Josh Allen after getting to know him in this short period of time. And he said, the things that stick out to him were the competitiveness, the intelligence that he brings as a very smart football player. And you go back to, the combine last year, and he had the highest Wonderlic score of any rookie quarterback coming out last year. And I think that, Brian Dable even made a point to mention, that Josh Allen's, desire to win, that singular focus to win, is something that, these coaches look for in players. And I think that permeates throughout the building. And you see it in the way that he's kind of revered in the locker room. But I also think from an intelligence standpoint, in the way that he handles everything with a calmness, I think he's handled the outside pressures as well as anybody could have hoped. I mean, you look at the national narrative, it's hard. He follows Barstool. He's on social media. He sees a lot of the negative comments that are being said to him. And, it's almost like he's impervious to it. Like it doesn't really impact him. He's worried about the message that's coming within the building in Orchard Park. And one of the people delivering that message now is Ken Dorsey. And it seems like he's saying all the right things. And it seems like you said, a perfect fit.
Yeah, Allen is ultra competitive. Even today, he took part in the Micah Hyde celebrity softball game, and he won the home run derby. And he took that very seriously, the competition. I know he had been eliminated, a fan vote brought him back in, but he made the most of that second chance. So no matter what it is, he takes these things very seriously, and he is very smart. And like you said about Dorsey, Dorsey didn't have the NFL arm, so to speak, but he had the intelligence. He can read defenses. Those are things that he can help Josh Allen with if Josh Allen really needs the help with those areas. But what he didn't have, Josh Allen has in a surplus, the arm strength, the mobility, he has a lot of the things that Dorsey didn't have, and that's what prevented Dorsey from becoming a good or great pro. So I think the two of them working together, they can both mesh their traits and kind of really help Allen take that next step in year two.
One last week of OTAs, and we'll be back in Orchard Park to have you covered next week, 3-day mini camp before we get a nice little break before training camp. Very, very big 2019 season is almost upon us. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, hit the little alarm clock thing. It'll give you a notification every time we put out a new video. And Ryan and I are going to be ramping up this coverage, especially when the season kicks off, to bring you guys as much analysis and commentary that we can bring you to keep you up on the Buffalo Bills. And as always, for all of your Bills content, keep it locked in NYUpSyracuse.com.